Happy Thursday to you, everyone. I sincerely hope you're doing well, and I'm hoping you're having wonderful training days. Today I'm going to be answering a question from two viewers. It's literally the same question. One of them has a problem in which when she trains inside of her home, when she's doing training sessions inside the home, everything's great. The dog is progressing like no tomorrow, doing super well. But when you take the dog outside, it's a completely different story. No training has occurred. And I had the exact same question come in from another viewer, with the only exception being parks. In one park location, one that's very familiar to the owner and the dog's doing great. But as soon as he tried to train his dog at a different park, didn't happen at all. Didn't happen. So both of them were asking me, Brian, what the heck is going on here? You know, it's not like these are 4-month-old dogs either. So we're going to just kind of take away age. Both these dogs are well over a year of age. And they've kind of been outside. You know, housebreaking has been successful. They've gone to different parks. But what's going on at this moment here? And I'm sure a lot of you encountered this at some point in your dog's training, or you're going to if you have a young dog right now. So that's why it's really important I just kind of go over this. Okay, well, one of the first things I want to talk about, when you train a dog, just like if you're going to train a human being, you have to take into account attention, motivation, and cognition. I talked about it before. It's hard to get a great performance from your dog if you fail to arouse it. You fail to gain its attention. You fail to motivate it. You don't do that, then don't expect a great performance and don't expect the dog to learn. So you have to do that. However, there's this old saying, you should never stand in the middle of a 2-lane road because you could get hit from both sides. But in this situation, you need to be standing in the middle of that 2-lane road. And I'll explain that in a second, but just know this. There's a huge difference between trying to train your dog inside of a room like this versus out here. Versus that road. And there's a road over there with 6 lanes in it. So definitely don't stand in the middle of that. And that can be a big problem because what's happening here for these two dogs in particular, the situation that's occurring is that once I dug into it just a little bit deeper and found out a little bit more about the temperaments of these dogs and found out that both of them is what we'd call from a personality standpoint, scroungers. They're not producers, so they're not the big gatekeepers of the society. They're not like a politician going out kissing babies and shaking hands. They're not going out searching for new food patches and exploring habitats that could be very rich in comparison to the habitat that they have. They're scroungers, and remember, scroungers just kind of follow along with producers. They just kind of see what they do, and they're glad to take leftovers when it comes to finding new food sources. So what's happening with them is this. Because their temperament's a little lower, their genetic baseline's a little weaker, well, you're going to have a situation in which, here's the deal. Remember I told you need to arouse your dog. However, heightened arousal beyond a certain adaptive level will actually prohibit accurate observation and simulation of all the information that you're trying to provide to the animal, and same thing with the environment. So again, if the arousal level goes too high beyond a certain adaptive level, your dog's ability to accurately observe its environment, interact with its environment, and interact with you and learn from you is prohibited. It shuts it down. Yeah, I mean, you have all sorts of chemical issues that occur with that. You have a rise in cortisol, you have a rise in norepinephrine. And when these things happen, they will actually stop and really inhibit the transmission and transcription of information. So again, we got to be careful. You don't want to get all the way in one lane like the fast lane, get all the way in the slow lane. You kind of need to be there in the middle. So that means that these dogs are becoming overly aroused for one of two reasons. I believe the number one reason is because of fear. Another reason could be they're super excited. Sometimes you take a dog to a novel environment like a park or even outside, wow, now all of a sudden they are aroused to a very high level. But the issue is they're aroused by everything but you. Training's boring. God, I've done 1,000,000 heels, 1,000,000 downs, 1,000,000 sit and stays in places. But man, there's the biggest bushy tail squirrel I've ever seen. Wow, it's incredible. Whoa, there's a limb over there. I've never seen that limb before. And what's that sound that I'm hearing? Remember cognition? What is cognition? It is the mental transformation of information flowing through my senses, changing it into knowledge about the environment, and then the flexible application of that knowledge. That's all it is. So you're taking stuff coming in through your eyes, through your nose, through your ears, through your sense of touch, and you're processing it, and you're transcribing it, and you're trying to turn it into knowledge that you can use while you interact with that environment. So if the dog is super excited, then you're competing with that dog's excitement. You're competing with the environment in which the dog is in. Absolutely. For that, you can train through that. You can train through it. However, if the dog is super afraid, maybe I don't know this new park. Remember, anytime we find ourselves in a novel environment, especially if it's a new park, then I'm going to seek out the rules of prediction and control. Until I've got that, there's no learning. Hey, give me a second. I need to figure out what's going on around here. Just in case we get separated, I need to know how I get home. So you got a lot of latent learning going on. You have a lot of elicited stimulus happening. You have a lot of things occurring at the exact same time. Make sure that if you're training through a situation, you believe that your dog, the cause of your dog's inability to learn is due to its heightened arousal from excitement. Remember, the stress response can go for two reasons. I'm the hunter or you're the prey. It can be either or. Hunter would be more excited. If your dog is excited, I'd recommend start off with things that are easier for your dog to learn. They just don't require a lot of moving parts. For example, coming to me and then doing a finish around me and taking up a position to one side of my body or the other, there's a lot of thought in that. Versus stay. Like a dog that does a stay over here, Jake's going to do place for Sterling. That's not hard. You know, from a cognitive standpoint, having to use my brain, not a lot of that's required at this moment. Once you get some fundamentals down, hey, get on this material, stay on that material until you receive a complex signal. Doesn't require a lot. In fact, that's why we use material, because they're going to drift off and go to their happy place. They're just going to think about, wow, check out that car that went by, and check out that bird that just flew overhead. Is that a dog barking down the way? What's going on over there? Because it's so simple for them to do. I recommend that start with something like a static position, a down stay or sit stay or place. Not a lot of complex problem solving on the part of the dog. And once the dog seems to be doing better with that, more focused on you, has its attention on you, then you can start to work through all these other competing motivators. Things that are competing with you. Hey, Bryan, I get that you want me to do this stay, but I'd much rather go over there and chase that squirrel. You can work through that in training. So now let me talk about fear real quick. If you feel that your dog is afraid, and it's giving you all those behavioral signs that it's afraid, everything from ears back, and maybe the eyes are dilated, shaking, tremors, just you should know your dog by now. Both of you viewers should know your dog very well. You've had it for both these dogs for a long time. I don't need to tell you when you feel like your dog is afraid. You know that better than I do. But if you feel that your dog is fearful at that moment, then you've got to be very careful about something here. So many times we believe that exposure to an area that is unfamiliar to an animal, that's caused an animal to be fearful, will solve our problem. Yeah, it will. If you take it slowly. Slowly. You cannot teach behaviors because the cortisol and epinephrine levels are too high when you have heightened arousal. So therefore, if you keep your dog in the same area for prolonged exposure, can lead to heightened reactivity. So you hear that? Prolonged exposure, meaning you're there too long. Again, habituation doesn't occur under a situation like that. They're there too long. So I definitely recommend that you start off with short little increments, maybe a few minutes, then grow it to a few more minutes, then to a half an hour, then to an hour, however long it takes. slowly, you got to be patient. I've taken dogs with what I do to areas that they were extremely fearful to be there. But it's kind of necessary for them to be able to go to these places for their owners to actually own these particular dogs. They had to be able to go to work with them because they worked 12-hour shifts. It was too long for the dog to stay at home by itself. Or they want to use this dog as a service dog, a possible service dog, or maybe an emotional support dog. There's many reasons why a dog may have to overcome being exposed to certain environments that has all sorts of things in it. Mechanized machinery that you have with humans, different people, different animals involved. When you do that, just keep this in mind. You're going to need to expose your dog to that environment. You're going to have to learn. I find that they already know some training before you go in that environment, then they can lean on you for social support. Meaning you have the attitude, I got it. I got it. Stand down. Don't worry about it. I got you right here, baby. I got you. So you're like that big parent, kid you not, with a little child holding your hand. Oh my gosh, the number of studies have been done on that, I don't even know how many have been done in which they allow the child to hold the hand of a confident adult and they measured the child's stress response and it was way down at the bottom. And then they had the child hold the hand of an adult that was afraid and the stress response goes through the roof. Guys, that's that temporal thing, man. It's just a touch, a tactile. You've got to be able to convey to your dog, I have this. And one of the best ways to be able to do that is for you to be able to control your dog. Because at least between the two of you, man, push come to shove, man, you are far more capable of dealing with this darn thing than I am. So do a little bit of training ahead of time to establish that strong social support. And then make sure your exposure to that outsider, to that new part, is done in small increments. Maybe just a few minutes at a time. Do that. Make sure you now also try to find something that you can use as a bit of a cognitive shift. I've had captains in many places. Again, I remember during literally the first year of his life, I was on a book tour for my book, Embracing the Wild in Your Dog. And we were at all these cities all over the United States. And he'd had to hop out of the vehicle at a rest stop, and he's looking around like, oh my gosh, I'm at a rest stop. What the heck is this place? Yeah, and then a hotel in New York, and then all of a sudden a hotel in Chicago, and a hotel in Miami. It was just very difficult for this young dog to make these adjustments quickly because they'd happen overnight. And therefore, I did exactly what I practiced before we went on that book tour. Captain was already very well trained for his given age. He loved the ball. I made sure that ball was presented at every rest stop that we stopped, every hotel that we visited. I made the time to throw the ball, even threw it down sidewalks, areas in which I knew he'd be safe. He'd be on a long line. I didn't risk my dog becoming endangered by or being hit by a car, becoming lost. I did these things with him over and over again to make sure that I did not prolong, make sure his exposure was not too prolonged, make sure I had social support given to him, and make sure I provided a cognitive shift and something that was fun. And of course, you guys have all seen Captain how many times, I don't know how many times in these daily lives that I do. He's wonderful. He's very confident, he's very stable, he's very intelligent, he's very obedient. He is the dog that I would want to always own. Always. Of all the dogs I meet, Captain's my favorite. And I've owned a lot of dogs, and I've met a lot of people with their dogs, and I wouldn't trade Captain for anyone. Captain is the dog, and a lot of viewers write that in. They say, man, I wish I had your dog. Yeah, listen to me. Okay, so just a real quick recap. When you find your dog not performing as well in a certain environment versus another environment, think about two things. Arousal. How high is the dog's arousal going? Is it going from excitement or is it going from fear? Excitement, we work through with training. We work through. With fear, we work through exposure, pre-training first, then exposure in small increments, then through counter-conditioning, through a cognitive shift type formula in which we now play with the dog with a ball, or we bring the best darn treats in the whole wide world. But I promise you, if you just stick with this, just keep going, you'll get there. And then one last little thing. Again, I'm a firm believer, always pick battles big enough to matter, small enough to win. Really think about it, especially when it comes to unfamiliar parks. Are you really going to be going to so many unfamiliar parks that your dog has to be absolutely perfect in those environments? If the answer to that question is no, probably not, then go work on something else. Just leave that one alone. You've got other things to work on. Allow the dog to mature for about another year or two, and then start to see what we have then. What is developed at that point there. Then go to that unfamiliar park. Pick your battles, big enough to matter, small enough to matter. There you go. So I hope that helps you. It's just a really quick, short version. Again, I could spend over an hour, hour and a half just talking about this alone. But just a little bit of tidbits there. Follow those tips, and I guarantee you, you and your dog will overcome the situations that you're occurring right now with those different environments. Okay, guys, take care. I'll be answering another question tomorrow, a unique situation. Make sure you tune in in case your dog goes through the same thing.